Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our latest Department of Defense Information Analysis Center webinar that will cover an introduction to nuclear testing. My name is Steve Rutherford, and I have the great privilege of being the director of the Homeland Defense and Security Information Analysis Center. And today we're going to host Mr. Alan Carr as the latest speaker in this ongoing series of webinars. Thanks to all of you for taking time out to join us today for this exciting and very relevant topic. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor, the Defense Technical Information Center. Without DTIC sponsorship, this webinar series just wouldn't be possible. So a few admin notes as we begin. Please note that all your attendee lines have been muted right now. So if you have any questions during the webinar, we're going to ask you to submit them using the attendee chat box that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. For those watching on our streaming services, you can also submit questions through those platforms. You can submit your questions as private to the presenters or so we can all see. We all enjoy the dialogue that these questions often spark. I'm going to try to save the last 10 minutes or so of the presentation time to go over as many questions as we can with Mr. Carr. Please also note that this webinar is being recorded, and we'll provide you a link for the recording as well as the slides, and that'll be available at the HDIAC website for later download for our registered members. So with that admin stuff out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's presenter, Mr. Alan B. Carr, Senior Historian at Los Alamos National Lab. Mr. Carr started his career at Los Alamos in 2003 after completing his graduate work at Texas Tech University. As an historian, Alan has appraised thousands of sets of records held by the laboratory organizations for their historical value. And over the years, Alan has produced several publications pertaining to the Manhattan Project, nuclear weapons testing, and the lab's development during the Cold War years. Most recently, Alan authored an article titled Of Clouds and Craters, The Incredible Story of U.S. Nuclear Weapons Testing in the 2020 summer-fall issue of the U.S. Army Nuclear and Countering WMD Agency's Journal. Check it out. Alan has also lectured for numerous professional organizations, and he's been featured as a guest on many local, national, and international radio and television programs. He currently serves as a program manager and, as I said, the senior historian for the Los Alamos National Laboratory. It is our distinct honor to host him today, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Alan.
Hey, great. Steve, hopefully you can hear me still. And I really appreciate the invitation to be here from the HDIAC. Appreciate Steve, appreciate John, who helped with technical difficulties on my end today. And so, again, really appreciate the help and the invitation, and very grateful to all of you for tuning in today. Let me see. So I'm going to go on to our title slide there. And so a few caveats here before we begin. Now, nuclear testing, full-scale nuclear testing in the U.S. occurred between 1945 and 1992. We're going to try and cover all of that in 45 or 50 minutes. So obviously, there's going to be a lot of things that I leave out. I've kind of selected what I think is interesting, some of the most relevant tests that we did. You're going to get to see a lot of videos in this presentation. And hopefully it'll be fun. So remember, there are a lot of those things that I've left out. You might ask why I've left those out. Maybe you've got a favorite aspect of testing that I've not covered. Be sure and let's chat about that in a little while. And also, to save time, we're going to really be focusing more on atmospheric nuclear testing today. Underground nuclear testing is also an incredible story. I am going to touch on that some as we get pretty deep into the talk today. Can't talk about it as much. You know, there's not as much great footage of fireballs, obviously, and you know, the yields are classified. So that story, I think, is always good to have at a more protected level than just me speaking in my kitchen. But if you're a big fan of underground testing, sorry, but there won't be a huge dose of that today. But do check out the article that Steve mentioned earlier that's in Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction. It is the article version of this talk. There's going to be more information there, a lot of fun sea stories, and let me know what you think of that. But let's go ahead and start our talk for today. A lot of people help me out with this. You will notice many people from Livermore. There's a rumor going around that me and Livermore don't get along. Totally untrue. I've got lots of friends there, and they helped out with the talk today. Also, you might be intrigued to see that we're thanking the Moscow Symphony Orchestra today. We will. I will explain that later, and I'll just let you wonder about it for now. But a little bit of a hint as to what that pertains to. You'll see over there on the right, Trinity and Beyond, the atomic bomb movie. Many of you have probably seen that before. I highly recommend it, narrated by William Shatner. Specifically, I'm mentioning it today because over there on the left, you will see Peter Curran's name from Livermore. Pete Curran has a Livermore badge. He's a consultant there. He has his own business on the side. You'll see a lot of his videos on YouTube at Adam Central. Pete is the one who put the movie together. He started out his career doing special effects. In fact, he's one of the lead animators for the original Star Wars trilogy of films. Did a lot of other films, got interested in nuclear testing, and he is so helpful. He's gone into the National Archives, found film. He lets me use that film for free. You're going to see some clips that have come from him. And so many thanks to Pete. And I'm putting a plug in for his video because, well, he lets me use stuff for free. And I think that's a pretty good reason. So let's go ahead and start. And Steve, if you want, why don't we queue up this video? And I'm going to play the first video for you. It does not have any sound, and so don't be looking for that. We're going to give this a test here in just a second. Here we go. And I'm going to go ahead and play this as I kind of talk through the slide. So there were many reasons why the U.S. tested, okay? Some of them are listed. You'll be able to see a list of them in just a moment when the video's done playing. But the world's first nuclear test, Trinity, which we'll talk about in a moment, they were looking at many things. It was a heavily diagnosed, lots of diagnostics with the Trinity test. But the main reason that they did it was to make sure it works. That's pretty fundamental. It was a non-weaponized version of a Fat Man. Does it work? The test director, in his report, offered the reason for why Trinity was conducted. He said, this was Ken Bainbridge, no one was content that the first trial of a Fat Man gadget should be over enemy territory where, if the gadget failed, the surprise factor would be lost and the enemy might be presented with a large amount of active material in recoverable form. Now, of course, we all think of nuclear weapons and we think of deterrence. But do remember, back in World War II, these were not designed as weapons of deterrence. They were designed to go into combat, and they did. And we certainly don't want to drop one over enemy territory without knowing for sure that it's going to go off. So that was the main reason there. You know, does it work? Of course, the Department of Defense wants to know, well, when we put one of these into combat, what will it do? And so we have weapons effects tests. We're going to see that in Operation Crossroads in a few minutes. Most tests that were conducted, and over 1,000 nuclear weapons tests were conducted by the United States during those years, were intended to advance weapons design. So this was done to advance yields, improve efficiency, et cetera, little tweaks here and there in test devices to improve the physics design of nuclear weapons. There were a handful of tests that were performed to validate the reliability of the weapons in stockpile confidence tests. Not many, not as many as you might think. Let me, hold on just a second. There we go. Sorry about that. Also, there were a few full systems tests. This is where the nuclear weapon was tested in the full configuration that it would be used in combat. Again, not very many of those, but we are going to look at a couple today. Also, of course, with nuclear weapons, we want to make sure that they are safe. And so there are an increasing number of safety tests that are performed as time goes on. Vulnerabilities, of course, you know, when we think about the World War II designs, Little Boy, Fat Man, those weapons were designed to work. That was job number one. They had to work. They had to be incredibly reliable, incredibly robust, but they were not packed with features, you know, and so things like safety, of course, were given some thought, but there was a whole lot of room for improvement. And so, you know, again, with safety, with vulnerability, if they fall into the wrong hands, how do we make sure that a device is not detonated by an adversary? So testing was done to improve those features of nuclear weapons. And finally, some of these weapons tests were not actually weapons tests at all, but they were nuclear detonations for non-weapons purposes. And we'll look at that a little bit later in the presentation. And some of those non-weapons purposes include nuclear fracking, excavation experiments, and I'm sure that many of you listening in today are already familiar with the history of testing and probably have a few things in mind. So we'll see what we have. Let me see if I can advance the slides here. So let's talk about Trinity very quickly today. Now, I see a good questions coming in already, and so I really want to save some time for chat with all of you today. Let me mention this though. If we don't get to your question or comment or correction, strongly encourage corrections as well. If I don't get to those today, my email address is abcarr, at lanl.gov. That's ABCARR at LANL.gov. I might not be able to get back to you right away, but I do respond to email, and I look forward to hearing from you that way. So let's keep moving on. So you see our first bullet up there. Los Alamos scientists knew little boy, and by the way, I am, as you heard, the Los Alamos historian, so you are going to get things from a Los Alamos perspective today. There are many others, and be sure and explore those as well. But anyway, you'll see they knew little boy would work. What I mean by that is the odds of little boy not working were astronomically small. It's a pretty simple weapon. They did lots of non-full-scale testing on little boy here at the laboratory, such as nuclear criticality testing, etc. They were beyond confident little boy would work. Of course, Fat Man, not quite as much. Fat Man was more complicated. They didn't have much time to perfect it. And by the way, I'm in the process of finishing up an article on Trinity, pretty long article, and if you're interested in that, I think it'll be coming out later this year, but I can send you a draft. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. We found some cool new records that I got to consult in writing that, so you might hear a few things at least that you haven't heard before. Trinity, of course, is well known. There are books written on it, articles, all kinds of things pertaining to it. But again, Fat Man's more complicated. They don't have time to really work on it as much as they would like. Oppenheimer, I should mention, formally reorganized the laboratory to build Fat Man on August 14th, 1944. Exactly 1 year later, the Emperor of Japan announced the surrender. So again, to go from, hey, let's reorganize the laboratory to build one, to putting them successfully into combat, a little bit less than a year. Really remarkable when you think about it. Oppenheimer gave Trinity, the Trinity test, its name. There's a story behind that. I'm going to skip it for today. If you want to hear it, ask me in chat. That would be good. One thing that's wrong, I would say at least, on my slides that I should get fixed, detonation occurred at 5:29 and about 15 seconds, according to the test director's report, give or take. They did not have the exact time, but they think it was around that. So Arnold wants to hear about the name of Trinity. Okay, I'll throw that in there really quickly. Oppenheimer named Trinity. We know that for sure. He himself, though, he wrote to General Groves years after the war. General Groves wanted to know, and by the way, if you don't know, General Groves was in charge of the entire Manhattan Project. He was Oppenheimer's boss. He was writing his memoir, wrote to Oppenheimer during the Cuban Missile Crisis, hey, where'd that name come from? Oppenheimer wrote back, says, yes, I came up with the name, but I'm not exactly sure why. I was reading John Donne's poetry at the time. One of the lines in one of the poems I read was, batter thy heart, three-personed God. But I'm not really sure if that's why I named it Trinity, but that may have inspired it. So that's what we know there about the name. So many good stories in testing, and that's just one of them. But what I'd like to do now is, Steve, why don't we cue up our second video? This one's going to be silent as well, and I'm going to talk you through this one a little bit. That is Norris Bradbury kind of hunched over, the guy in the middle there, hunched over the device. Bradbury was Oppenheimer's successor, and he was in charge of assembly. In the back right over there, he's out of the frame. There he is. He's coming back. That is Marshall Holloway. Saw him for a second. But anyway, Marshall was one of the lead people who figured out Ivy Mike, how to put it together in the Pacific, who did the engineering on that, often forgotten. A lot of good Marshall Holloway stories. There's Oppie right there. And up goes the device up to the top of the tower. And you're going to see Norris Bradbury. There's Norris again. I forgot if I mentioned, I'm talking so fast today. But Bradbury was the director of Los Alamos from 1945 until 1970. So he was our director for 25 years. But anyway, much more on that for a different day. Trinity produced an official yield of 21 kilotons. That is something that we're still assessing today. A recent unclassified assessment from Los Alamos. This will be in an article that's joining my article on Trinity from the American Nuclear Society coming out later this year. Places the yield, I believe, at 24 kilotons or 24.8, something like that. But again, that is unclassified, and you can have the article to refer to coming out very soon. So still, we're trying to figure out exactly what the yield is. But what I want to bring into focus here is that these new weapons are entirely different than anything that's been seen before. For instance, let's take Little Boy at officially 15 kilotons. To deliver 15 kilotons of energy on a target, the day before Trinity, you would have needed 1,500 bombers, 15,000 airmen, and many hours, if not days. Now, one of these weapons could be put into combat very quickly. You could destroy a city without basically putting anyone in harm's way. This was really revolutionary. Also, the thing is, Fat Man, I think, was really the decisive weapon of the war. Little Boy could not be rapidly reproduced, but Fat Man could. In fact, we could have put another weapon into combat around August 19th or 20th. 3 or 4 more weapons could have been put into combat in September. 3 more weapons in October, and the numbers only would have gone up from there. And there were already plans, at least among the military people, to use them in a tactical manner, supporting an invasion. If you'd like to see some of those records, that's something that I can email to you as well. Before we leave Trinity, so much more to say. There's a lot about health hazards and radiation levels and things like that. I think that we had a question about that earlier. I'll come back to that in a little while because we're going to get mired in Trinity if we don't push things along. But if you do have a question about that, ask me in chat. My chapter that's coming out on Trinity does touch on that issue. That is still something that is controversial, at least here in New Mexico, even today. And let me see, regarding what it was like to be there, I put my single favorite quote from Trinity, and there are a lot of them on the screen, from Victor Weisskopf. You get this huge range of emotion from the scientists, but in a couple of lines, Weisskopf, who was one of our theoretical physicists, says, "Our first feeling was one of elation, then we realized we were tired, and then we were worried." What does he mean? Well, this was like the grand scientific pursuit. It was the ultimate experiment, maybe the greatest scientific experiment ever. That's something that you can all debate. Of course, you're going to be elated. It worked. And, then they realized they were tired. They had been working long 6-day weeks, long hours every day, and nobody had slept leading up to Trinity, hardly. And so they were exhausted. Apparently, the drive back to Los Alamos was a somber one. Even though the scientists were exhausted, many of them couldn't sleep because, remember, this is not a weapon of deterrence. This is a weapon that's going to go into combat right away. They were already thinking about the next World War, and maybe a World War that would feature multiple nations with nuclear weapons using them against each other. So they were kind of nervous too. But anyway, let's continue on and talk about Operation Crossroads. A lot of people thought that the laboratory and maybe even nuclear weapons altogether would go away after the war. In fact, one of Oppenheimer's first post-war jobs was to write what was called the Acheson-Lilienthal Report, also known as the Baruch Plan. The proposal was the U.S. will get rid of all of its nuclear weapons, release all of its nuclear secrets, dismantle the complex, and allow the country to be inspected by foreign inspectors. In exchange, other countries would have to agree to the same thing. Now, of course, Stalin is still in charge of the Soviet Union. Can anybody here imagine Joseph Stalin welcoming in foreign inspectors into his country? So that didn't happen, but still, nobody knew what was going to happen next. And at Los Alamos, we were created with a single mission: build reliable nuclear weapons as quickly as possible. We did that. Of course, and this is Los Alamos bias. We all know the Manhattan Project was huge and employed hundreds of thousands of people all over the country. But again, from my Los Alamos perspective, it looked like we might go out of business. But then at the end of 1945, we have a customer, and that customer is the United States Navy. And so the Navy shows up. Remember, the Army was in charge of the Manhattan Project. The Army has nuclear weapons. Well, the Navy wants to see what they will do against a fleet of ships. And these are surplus U.S. ships, captured German and Japanese ships. So this becomes known as Operation Crossroads. They place an order for 3 weapons, and that gives the laboratory something to do instead of just drying up and going away. So we start working on this. Crossroads turns out to be a pretty significant spectacle. There are over 40,000 people that attend Operation Crossroads, which is held in the Pacific in the Marshall Islands. Let me see. Oh, sorry. Had the phone a little. I guess I got a little too excited. Hopefully the audio is a little bit better there. So thanks for the tip from my buddy Amber. I'll probably do that again, so just keep reminding me. But anyway, we want to find out. This is purely a weapons effects test. We're not changing weapons design or anything like that. I'm going to. I should mention good article by Alex Wellerstein on his blog from this past summer. I think it's called something like What Journalists Should Know About the Nuclear Strikes. Of course, last summer was the 75th anniversary of Trinity and the atomic strikes on Japan. Go check that out because Alex notes, not everybody thought using nuclear weapons at the end of the war was really a great idea. Nuclear weapons were controversial from day one, not only the use of them, but also even Operation Crossroads. And so I think Crossroads kind of turns into the first big scandal. And you're going to see that reflected in Admiral Blandy's comments. I'm going to let Admiral Blandy speak here in just a moment. In fact, Steve, if you want to go ahead and cue up that video for us, that would be great. And he's having to defend himself. Here we go. Yeah, let me start that. I think everybody's going to enjoy this clip. Somebody asked if my slides were available, and yes, they are. Just send me an email, and I will transfer them to you. This is probably one of those videos you'll want to play for all of your friends.
The bomb will not start a chain reaction in the water, converting it all to gas and letting all the ships on all the oceans drop down to the bottom. It will not blow out the bottom of the sea and let all the water run down the hole. It will not destroy gravity. I am not an atomic playboy, as one of my critics labeled me, exploding these bombs to satisfy my personal whim.
Of radioactivity, safety patrols immediately entered the lagoon for a preliminary appraisal of the damage. In an effort to reduce dangerous contamination, ships were sprayed with water and special chemicals so that inspection parties could board them. We must defend ourselves against this new and elemental force or be destroyed by it.
Somebody always asks about the sound, and this time it's at least Nolan asking about that. No, the sound's all fake. When a nuclear weapon goes off, all you see as an observer is the bright light. You might see the blast forming, that kind of thing. It's going to take 40 seconds, maybe longer, for the shock wave and the sound to reach you. And so when we're making these videos, well, we just can't have an explosion and it be silent. People aren't used to that. And so we're going to pump in artificial sound. Now, as you'll find out, as time goes on, the fake sound is not good enough. We're going to need to take the fake explosion noise and pair it with very dramatic opera music as well. So you can be the judge of that if it had the desired effect or not when we get to a couple more slides in just a moment. But don't you feel sorry for Admiral Blandy there? Nobody liked Admiral Blandy. He's an atomic playboy. He just goes and sets off nuclear bombs because he can. Must have been nice, right? That'd be pretty cool. But anyway, the Army doesn't like him. General Groves doesn't like him. And as I mentioned, they order 3 weapons. The first one is an airdrop, and it misses by about half a mile or more. It does not explode over the center of the fleet. Instead, it explodes over the one of the main diagnostic ships, fortunately unmanned, and sinks it. And so we don't have a whole lot of great footage from surface level because of that miss. Second shot, which is the famous one, and you can see a photograph of it there at the bottom, and that was what you were seeing in the video there, was called Crossroads Baker. We're going to set off a weapon directly underneath the fleet, and obviously they did not miss with that. The third test was canceled. It was going to be a deep underwater shot called Charlie, and by the way, in our first few test series, we're going to reuse the name Able Baker Charlie over and over again. It gets really confusing because there's like 4 or more Able shots. but anyway, that is what's going on with Crossroads Able. With Operation Crossroads. Let's go on to our next slide. There we go. And we're going to run through a few test series really quickly. Again, not a whole lot of time today, and you can find out a little bit more detail in my my article. And of course, there's tons of stuff out there on testing, documentaries and reports and everything else. But what I've tried to do with this talk and with the article is basically give people a pretty good idea of what went on in testing, just in something that is small and bite-sized and can be shared early. Hopefully that hits the mark, but we'll see. Anyway, the Cold War unfolds, and I think that the Cold War has roots all the way back to 1917. We never really liked or trusted the Soviet Union, and after the end of World War II, we kind of remembered why we didn't like the Soviet Union. We couldn't make that deal to eliminate nuclear weapons, and on top of that, at least from our point of view, there's a Soviet point of view. You can ask me about that as well if you want to chat, but anyway, there's the Berlin blockade. In 1949, the Soviet Union tests its own weapon. We'll come back to that in just a moment. The Korean War, China becomes communist. All these things happen in 1949, 1950. We discover the atomic spies amongst us. I have a talk on that for a different day if you're interested, by the way. But anyway, in the later 1940s, things are kind of quiet. Here at Los Alamos, we are looking at refining fission weapons very gradually. We're also looking at the super, or a thermonuclear weapon as well. We had a group here during the war looking at that, and work never stopped. That was always really a part of what we did here. So anyway, the stockpile is really not growing. Los Alamos is the production center at this point in time, but we don't build a huge stockpile. The stockpile numbers are very small, and we don't do a test series that advances weapons design until 1948. That is Operation Sandstone. So we make some modifications to a fission bomb, and we double our yield. And for today, I will leave it at that. A lot more detail to be said there. But of course, all of you know about, I think, about NV209. That is the official DOE report with all of the official yields. You can find it easily online, and I highly recommend that, especially if you're not familiar with it. But again, I bet that all of you are. Do have that reference handy, and again, I'll send a copy if you have a problem finding it online. But that's NV209, U.S. Nuclear Test, 1945 to 1992. And so anyway, you will see in there basically double the yield in Operation Sandstone. Still, not a lot. We don't have a very diverse stockpile at this point in time. We don't have hardly any weapons in it. But then in 1949, the Soviet Union does its first test secretly, and that test is called RDS-1 or Joe-1. It's kept secret because Stalin knew as soon as the West found out about his weapons test that the arms race would start. We'd go, oh no, Stalin has bombs, let's build as many as we can. And that's exactly what happened. We found out about the Soviet test pretty quickly, and it was basically a copy of Fat Man that was made possible by spies throughout the Manhattan Project, but there were 4 here at Los Alamos along. And yes, Arnold asks about the spies, and yeah, I've got a talk on that. I can tell you all about the spies a different day. If I can come back and visit with you, we'll see how this talk goes first. But great story there, and I can at least send you my slide deck if you would like to see that. Again, just send me an email on that. So all of these things were going on. And I should say, the Soviets had really good scientists. I don't want to shortchange them at all. But as to where we lost a little over 300 Americans every day killed in combat on average during World War II, we were lucky. The Soviet Union lost 15 to 20,000 people killed as a result of military action every day of World War II on average. They endured as many as 27 million people killed, and much of the industrialized portion of their country lay in ruin. So even though they had a lot of really good scientists there, that's a pretty severe handicap to just turn around from a national disaster like that and build atomic bombs quickly. Well, they had some help through espionage. But anyway, this is really when the arms race does start to take off. You'll see the stockpile numbers growing. You'll also see the stockpile becoming much more diversified, and we're going to see that in the presentation as we move along. But anyway, because the Korean War is going to start the next year in 1950, we've got new weapons coming down the pipes. Do we really want to test them out in the middle of the Pacific, a long way from home where we might not have as much security as we would like? So we start thinking about a suitable location to test them here in the continental United States because we have more security, and it's going to be a lot cheaper to do tests here as well. And so anyway, Nevada is ultimately chosen as the test site. You will notice that we did not test again, at least in the atmosphere here in New Mexico. We were way too close to people. And as I mentioned before, that remains a problem. It remains contested today how much damage Trinity may have caused. But anyway, Nevada is chosen. Turns out to be pretty ideal, especially for underground nuclear testing, as we're going to see. President Truman signs an order creating the Nevada test site. Initially, it was known as the Nevada Proving Ground, but I think he signed it on December 18th, 1950 or something like that. About 6 weeks later, we started the first test series. So things happened really fast in a national crisis. That was known as Operation Ranger. These were all three, or I think, how many tests were there? Anyway, the Ranger tests were all airdrops in nearly the same location. Wow, pretty remarkable. We're going to only need 5 weeks to declare a test site and to start testing at it. Anyway, that's Operation Ranger. Next, that same year, just months after that, we conduct Operation Greenhouse in the Pacific. And we're going to have a couple of significant tests here on the way to thermonuclear weapons. The first is Greenhouse George. It's conducted May 8th, 1951. And it's the first test to produce thermonuclear burn. And so the thing here is, with fission weapons, we're going to split the nuclei of a bunch of atoms and release some energy. Well, it turns out if you can fuse deuterium and tritium, you can produce a lot more energy. And so that's what we did. George is not a full-scale thermonuclear test. We're not there yet, but it did show that you could produce thermonuclear burn. And you'll look at the yield. Now we've jumped from Batman, basically, or as it was known, codenamed, the Gadget, at 21 kilotons. We jumped all the way up to 225 kilotons with Greenhouse George. Another significant test from Greenhouse was called ITEM. It was conducted on May 24th, a couple weeks later. It was the first test of the boosting principle. And boosting is very important because what we want to do is try and get a lot of yield out of the small primary. In the architecture of a nuclear weapon, you have a primary and a secondary. Your primary is what you're going to use to start your secondary reaction, to start your fusion process. A little bit more in just a moment when we get to Operation Ivy. But anyway, if you want to have small hydrogen bombs and efficient hydrogen bombs, you're going to need small efficient primaries too. And so what's a way that we can boost the yield in a primary and get it smaller? Well, what if we injected some gas into the core of the bomb to produce some more neutrons? That might get us to where we need to be. And that is tested. The first test of this principle is Greenhouse ITEM. And in that weapon, of course, as you can see there, we have 45.5 kilotons of yield. Why don't we go ahead, Steve, and play the video. This is just a really quick video. This was scanned, I believe, by our friends at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. My friend Greg Spriggs, we've been working together since 2010, 2011. And we have approximately 20,000 reels of film in our collection. Livermore, between what Livermore, they've helped us scan some of these films. We've scanned some. We've collectively scanned about 8,000 of those now. I know that HDIAC, which is just down the road from us here in Albuquerque, they have thousands and thousands of films as well. And I think that they've begun scanning as well. So thanks to all the scanners who've made this possible. We'll go on to our next slide now and talk about Operation Ivy. Only a two-shot test series. This is conducted in 1952. These are two important tests, although we really only remember one of them. The first one was called Mike, and that's the first full-scale thermonuclear test. More on that in just a moment. But it was really a struggle to build thermonuclear devices. And I use the term device here because this is not a deliverable weapon. If you look over there at the photo in the top left, oops, let me go back there. If you look at the photograph in the top left there, you will see the Mike device. It's not something you can put in a plane. It is a 3-story building. You're going to see it blow up in the film in just a moment. But anyway, that's Marshall Holloway again, standing in the center of the photo there. He was back at Trinity as well. He's kind of the lead engineer physicist, if you will, the test director for this. Enrico Fermi first proposed the idea of a thermonuclear bomb way back in 1941. So it took over a decade to actually field one of these, just because the physics and the engineering are so incredibly difficult. But anyway, it's going to be tested October 31st, 1952. And as you'll note there on the slide, at 10.4 megatons, this device is 700 times more powerful than Little Boy. It was conducted on a little island called Aluga Lab. Aluga Lab no longer exists. There's now a 180-foot deep hole in the bottom of the ocean floor where that little island was. So this is immensely powerful. By the way, before we watch the video that's going to run about a minute and a half in just a moment, I do want to point out the other test. Now, this was considered very important. We had to stay ahead of the Soviets in the arms race. well, what if Mike doesn't work? What's the backup plan? So we designed the biggest fission-only weapon that we could, and this is a deliverable weapon. The second test was called Ivy King, and it was tested in November, a couple weeks later, and it produced a yield of 500 kilotons. And nobody remembers King. I mean, 500 kilotons is a really big test. It's the largest fission-only device that the U.S. ever made, but it is totally lost in the shadow of Mike. So, Steve, why don't we go ahead and play the video? By the way, if you like the video that you're about to see, it's called Operation Ivy. There is a classified version of it. I also have an hour-long version of this video, this documentary, on my personal YouTube page.
You have a grandstand seat here to one of the most momentous events in the history of science. In less than a minute, you will see the most powerful explosion ever witnessed by human eyes. The blast will come out of the horizon just about there. And this is the significance of the moment. This is the first full-scale test of a hydrogen device. If the reaction goes, we're in the thermonuclear era. For the sake of all of us, and for the sake of our country, I know that you join me in wishing this expedition well.
It is now minus 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, T0.
Alrighty, so of course my question for all of you is obvious. Did the opera music help? What do you think? Let me know in chat if you like the opera music. By the way, that's not the Moscow Symphony Orchestra. We'll be hearing from them in just a moment, but let's keep moving along. So Stacy the Fan, very good. All right, so now we're about to get to Moscow Symphony anyway, as we go through. The arms race is really picking up now. You know, by the time Stalin dies or is killed in 1953, depending on who you believe, maybe another question for chat there. In 1953, I think that the U.S. has something like 1,200 nuclear weapons. We really didn't even get into triple digits back in the 40s. So things are happening fast. Los Alamos cannot keep up with demand, and so the Rocky Flats plant is built just north of Denver in Colorado. Livermore is created in 1952, and so Sandia, for those of you tuning in from Sandia, like I think my buddy Eric McIntyre is here, for instance, Sandia started out as a wartime Los Alamos division, but it became its own entity in, I believe, 1948, if I remember correctly. So anyway, the complex is starting to grow. Now, Trinity and Mike were both breakthroughs. I don't think anybody would debate that. These were huge weaponeering and science breakthroughs. Anything beyond that, I don't know if I would consider a breakthrough or not. Probably, just really, really cool and important and difficult refinements. But if we're going to make an argument for another breakthrough, it might be with the development of tactical nuclear weapons. You might read every now and then in the different papers about how Los Alamos or Livermore are trying to make smaller yield nuclear weapons and this and that could lead to an increased possibility that they would be used. Well, nobody called me from the paper, but I'd like to point out that we've had lower yield weapons for a very long time. We've had tactical weapons, things of that nature. Anyway, as we look at this, the first full-scale tactical nuclear weapons test is conducted during Operation Upshot Knothole. That's going to be conducted in 1953, so not quite a year after Mike, probably about, 6 or 7 months. And anyway, it's going to produce 15 kilotons of yield, and you're going to get to see it in action. This is one of our few full-scale, or I should say not full-scale, but full systems tests. We're actually going to put a nuke in a cannon and shoot it. The cannon that you see there, the weapon system, is known as Atomic Annie. It's a 280 millimeter cannon based on a World War II German cannon, I believe. For those of you who don't know, the Germans actually had some really cool artillery pieces back in the Great War in World War II. But anyway, the idea here is that, we want to deter the Soviets, but at the tactical level. We also want to save some money. You know, the Soviet Union ultimately bankrupted itself for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons was that they spent a huge percentage of their GDP on military spending. They had tons of tank armies on their side of the Iron Curtain. Meanwhile, in the 1950s here in the United States, we did have some recession years, but on the whole, these were pretty prosperous times. The suburbs are being invented. People have food and a house and heat and maybe a car or two on top of that. So good times, we want to keep them that way. But we're going to lose all of our income if we start fielding tank armies. How can we deter them at the tactical level on the cheap? Well, I know, instead of a tank army, what if we just got a few guys and a gigantic nuclear gun and pointed it at them? Hence the idea, basically, for nuclear artillery. More to that. And by the way, the descendants of Atomic Annie stayed in the U.S. nuclear stockpile for years and years after this. But let's see this test. It was, again, upshot, not whole Grable. Let's see it in action. So, Steve, if you could cue up our video down there. And I do want to point out, I'm going to pause this really quickly. As we get close to detonation, if you look really closely, you can see the film jump just a little bit. And that's because for this artillery shell to travel the full, 7 miles that it had to, it actually took a lot longer than it appears in the film. So they cut out a bunch of the frames to get the explosion to go off a little bit faster. So be looking for that. But now, finally, I get to introduce and thank the Moscow Symphony Orchestra, who Pete commissioned to do the soundtrack for Trinity and Beyond, where you can see the full version of this film. Let's check it out. All right, and keep watching, and you'll see the smoke kind of jumps there. There it is. So that's how you get a nuclear artillery shell to move a little bit faster. You just cut frames out of the film. But anyway, I like that soundtrack. Don't tell our friends back in Moscow that, but well done, Moscow Symphony Orchestra there. So let's keep things moving. We're going to see how much stuff we can wedge into the next 10 minutes or so. What do you say? So we'll run through this pretty quickly. Of course, remember, this is not a deliverable thermonuclear weapon that we saw earlier in Ivy Mike. We've got to try and deliver or have a delivery system for thermonuclear weapons as quickly as possible, because in 1953, it appears that the Soviet Union takes the lead. They produce a thermonuclear weapon that is deliverable on an airplane. So we've fallen behind and everybody freaks out. It is a national emergency. Hence the rise of the emergency capability weapons. How fast can we get a thermonuclear weapon on a plane to try and keep the Soviets at bay? So this becomes Operation Castle in 1954. I believe that there were 6 tests in Operation Castle. Again, go ahead and pop those corrections in the chat wherever I get those wrong, and I'm sure I'm getting a few things wrong, maybe a lot, hopefully not. But anyway, remember, emergency capability. These are not highly refined, light, precise, nothing like that. It's just basically we're going to take something resembling the Mike device and see if we can load it on a plane. By the way, you might ask yourself, would you like to volunteer to be on the crew of the plane flying one of these thermonuclear weapons to Moscow? One of these weapons weighing tens of thousands of pounds. I don't know if I'd want that job. Hopefully those missile folks will come along with something better fast to save us some trouble. But anyway, this was what it was like, and it really was an emergency. Now, all of you have probably heard of the first test from the Castle series, Castle Bravo. It was the largest test that the United States ever conducted, and it produced a yield of 15 megatons. That's 1,000 times more powerful than Little Boy, and we can put it on a plane. Now, that yield was much greater than a lot of people expected, okay? It was supposed to be a lot smaller than that. And you probably heard about the fallout issues. As you can see on the screen there, over 200 Marshallese Islanders had to be evacuated from their homes. They didn't get to go back. There were Japanese fishermen in the area who were irradiated as well. One of them died after this test, and it is debated over whether they died as a result of exposure to harmful materials or if they died as a result of dubious medical practices that were used to try to help them when they got back to Japan. But that it was kind of an international fiasco. And the reason, if you're interested in the fallout of Bravo and the causes for it, there's a very good report by DITRA's own Byron Rispet, a good friend of mine, and Tom Kunkel, who is another good friend of mine who is retired from Los Alamos now. But that is an open report from Los Alamos. The fallout didn't happen just because the bomb was bigger. It was a lot more complex with that. They actually took a very conservative approach to safety, but stuff went wrong. They discovered the jet stream, for instance, in Castle Bravo. And again, we can track down a copy of that report for you if you would like to see it. Of course, Castle goes on. Livermore, I should mention as well, and I'm not picking on them at all, but, their first 3 tests did not work. 2 of them were an upshot, not whole, and their test in Castle was considered a failure as well. Livermore almost went out of business, but fortunately they didn't, and stuck around and did some really cool and innovative things that are definitely worth a discussion at the SRD level. But I just want to point out, these were really difficult times for our very young friends at Livermore at that point in time. But anyway, that is Castle. We're going to weaponize fusion. Remember, these weapons not all that great. It's just as good as we could do because we didn't want to go to World War III with the Soviet Union without having this. And remember, this is before mutual assured destruction. Nobody has enough weapons to wipe out the other country, although we are building them as quickly as we can. We're still really thinking about warfighting capability, and that ties in with our next slide here. Part of deterrence was not just having nuclear weapons, but it was able to develop a way for your civilian population to survive a nuclear war. If you can tell the enemy, hey, not only can we wipe out your civilian population or your military targets, back then the doctrine was it was called massive retaliation, and is exactly as it sounds. But also, if you start firing at us, we can protect our civilians from you. What does this become known as? The Civilian Defense Program. And this is a big deal. And, if you're thinking, well, wait a minute, how can you survive a nuclear war? Well, Steve is going to cue up a video, and I'm going to let my friend Bert show you how to survive a nuclear war.
There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered.
All right, so this is what it looks like, and you can ask yourself, is duck and cover going to save you from what you're seeing right now? And everybody can have a good laugh. But I want to point out that duck and cover very well could save your life. For instance, you've got to factor in a lot of things, like yield. If you're right under a thermonuclear bomb, you're not going to make it. Sorry, it's over. But let's take a situation like Hiroshima. And by the way, I do apologize if I sound clinical in talking about Hiroshima, Nagasaki, or some of these other tests. I'd recommend taking a look at John Hersey's essay, Hiroshima. You can find Hersey's Hiroshima online, or I could send you a copy if you're interested. But anyway, we're going to rush through this. I will continue to sound clinical. I apologize for that. But anyway, let's say that you are in a place like Hiroshima. You have a 15 kiloton burst. You're not going to be vaporized by the fireball or anything like that. You probably, if you die, you're probably going to die as a result of being burned. It's going to be pretty awful. You'll wish you had been vaporized, but that's just not what happened there. Let's say, though, that you're a couple miles away. You're at school, and you have a little bit of advanced warning, and you get under your desk. What is the main thing that you're going to be facing in the immediate aftermath? The blast. The blast is going to come through. It's going to shatter glass windows. It's going to maybe knock structures down. There's going to be a lot of splinters. That's what's going to kill you. And if you get under your desk, it could very well save your life depending on where you are and what the circumstances were. So, everybody likes to laugh at civil defense, but this was really well thought out. It was not just purely propaganda. I do want to point out before we leave this slide, I love the picture over on the right. Eric knows this came from Glenn McDuff. only in the mid-50s could you go and order that nice in-ground pool, and at the same place over there at Catalina Pools, order your nuclear bomb shelter as well. What a time it must have been, right? But anyway, remember, we're still before mutual assured destruction, and we're down to just a couple minutes. Wow, man, time goes fast when I'm having a good time. Hopefully you've had a good time today as well. We're just going to run through this really, really fast now. But anyway, remember the Operation Castle designs are really big, really heavy, and very difficult to deliver in combat. By 1956, with Operation Red Wing, we're going to test our second generation of deliverable thermonuclear weapons, and they're going to be lighter, and they're going to work a little bit better. So that's a big step forward. Operation Plum Bob, 1957, 28 tests. This is by far the largest test series in terms of number of tests conducted that have been performed up to that point in time. The big thing that's going to happen on the testing scene is going to happen early the next year in 1958. By the way, you see those pictures over there. The one on the top left, that is Red Wing Lacrosse. That was one of the most expensive tests probably that we ever did. Look at all of the lines of sight on Lacrosse. It was about $40 million, and I know that you're thinking that that doesn't sound like much, especially these days, but that was a lot of money back then. Also, if you want to do a bomb test cheaply, instead of building a steel 500-foot tower, you could just strap a nuke to a balloon, and that's exactly what you see in the other photograph over there on the right. But anyway, we're preparing to do a massive test in the Pacific called Operation Hardtack in the summer of 1958. But right before we start, the Soviet Union says, hey, we're going to stop testing nuclear weapons for the betterment of mankind, and we'd like for the U.S. to follow our great and glorious lead. We don't. We continue, and we do Operation Hardtack anyway. When it ends in August, President Eisenhower directs the laboratory directors to stand down on testing. We're going to stop testing. Well, Nikita Khrushchev, who's the premier of the Soviet Union at this point in time, says, well, wait a minute. You guys have been testing all summer long while we've been sitting on the sidelines. We're going to get some tests in before the test moratorium in October. So the Soviet Union does tons of tests. We do tons of tests. And by tons of tests, look at that, 36 tests in 49 days. Hardtack 2 was not originally called Hardtack 2. It was going to be called Operation Mill Race. But the problem was, you know, if we're going to declare that we're going into a testing moratorium one day and then the next day say, hey, we're going to start an entirely new test series, that doesn't look very good politically. And so anyway, we said we're going to enter into a testing moratorium in October. And by the way, we're just continuing Operation Hardtack. This is phase 2 of our series. And so for political purposes, basically, it was Hardtack 2 instead of Operation Mill Race. But you can see their safety tests. These are not huge yield tests. I see that there was a question about that. The idea is, are our weapons 1 point safe? You know, if we put these into a thermonuclear bomb, or, you know, if there's 1 point of detonation, of course, you've got multiple points of detonation inside of a nuclear weapon. If one of those goes off or something happens, is it going to produce a full nuclear yield, which we don't want it to? And that's why, you know, again, what the safety test is. We want to make sure that in the event of an accident, that these tests don't produce a full nuclear yield. Anyway, look at the numbers there from Rocky Flats. They were very busy up there in Colorado. Between 1959 and 1962, Rocky Flats built nearly 24,000 pits just in those few years. We don't have time for the video, but again, the video presentation is available to try and bring this to a close. And I am going to stick around for a few minutes. I know that we want to stick to time on the presentation. I certainly respect your time. I'm going to stick around, though, if you do have time to stick around and go through Q&A with me. Well, who do you think is going to resume testing first? Surprise, it's the Soviet Union. And I do want to say, though, the U.S., there were people in Washington who wanted to go back to testing. Remember, the testing moratorium is not a formal treaty. It is an informal year-to-year agreement, and you can break it, but the expectation is that you will give everyone else at least a little bit of notice. Well, the Soviet Union gives the world 1 day's notice, and they resumed testing September 1st, 1961. By the way, this was during a very hot spot in the Cold War. Gary Powers' U-2 plane had been shot down the year before. There was what else do we have going on here? Yuri Gagarin goes to space, and the Bay of Pigs happened within the same month, the same week, back in April of 1961, I believe. The Berlin Wall starts going up in the same month, August of 1961. So that same month, the Berlin Wall goes up, the Soviets resume testing. And I want to ask you a question as you look at that second bullet there. how long do you think it took the Soviet Union to prepare to do a test series that involved 59 tests that would be performed over only 65 days? Well, I think we can safely say it took them at least months, if not years, to prepare for that test series. These were big tests that were being done in the atmosphere. Meanwhile, President Kennedy, who you see there, he didn't like nuclear weapons, he didn't like nuclear testing, and he didn't like commies either. But he reluctantly decides we have to go back to testing. And so Livermore does a test called Antler on September 15th. You can see a picture of it shaking the ground over there on the right. It's 2.6 kilotons. By the way, an important takeaway that I would encourage all of you to remember is expect the unexpected when you're talking about nuclear testing, okay? Things did not always go the way that we thought that they would. And you've already seen a lot of examples of this. We start testing underground, all 10 of the shots that we do in 1961, all underground, all of them vent something. So lots of surprises in testing. Take that with you. Expect the unexpected as you're doing weapons work. But anyway, it's 2.6 kilotons. Los Alamos fires a test called True the next day. Its official yield is low. There is, and by the way, I'm looking for a source for this. If some of you can find it, the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, I believe, referred to these tests, which are being fired in response to these huge multi-megaton airbursts in the Soviet Union. I believe McNamara referred to these as nuclear burps. And I bet Eric McIntyre's already looking for a source for me because he's just the kind of guy to do that. But if you can find me a solid source for that, I would love to see it. But that's what these were referred to as. The Soviet Union, one of the culminating tests that they do is the test of the Tsar bomb. But this was the largest nuclear test ever conducted, 50 megatons. That's October 30th, 1961. And that's nearly 3,500 little boys in one deliverable case. And anyway, wish I had more time to show you the video on this screen. And I am going to wrap it up pretty fast here. Maybe this will just be an atmospheric nuclear testing talk. But anyway, we're testing underground, but we are forced to resume testing in the atmosphere for two reasons. First of all, politically, it's a pretty bad look to our allies if we're doing tiny tests underground. And they were important tests. Again, that's the reasons that we were doing those, and what we learned is more of an SRD level discussion. But anyway, the Soviet Union was learning a lot about electromagnetic pulse from doing these atmospheric tests, and we were falling behind. So they were learning how to best employ weapons to produce EMP and how to harden their own defensive locations, control centers, things like that, from EMP attack by us. And so finally, the president reluctantly authorizes the resumption of U.S. atmospheric nuclear testing. This is Operation Dominic. It runs from April 25th, 1962 to November 4th, 62. You'll notice that it runs through the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we were doing tests, and so were the Soviets, as the Cuban Missile Crisis unfolded. Anyway, more on that. We don't have a lot of time. You can see kind of the high points on the bullets there. We'll do more. I mentioned that I talked about underground testing a little bit, and I guess a really little bit here today, but it's too bad because a vast majority of the tests that we ever did were conducted underground, and most of those were done in Nevada. You can see a few highlights on this screen. Boxcar was the largest test we ever did in Nevada, underground or otherwise, at 1.3 megatons, just down the road from Las Vegas. And, you know, in the early days, nuclear testing was a tourist attraction, basically for the people of Las Vegas. By now, the people in Las Vegas who own the hotels, casinos, people like Howard Hughes, which you can read about in my testing article, they're growing pretty leery of this business. You know, we had a lot of leaks. Some of them were pretty catastrophic. The last of the catastrophic leaks was a Livermore test called Emory-Bainbury, and it changed everything. It didn't leak for the first 3 minutes after detonation, but after about 3.5 minutes passed, it opened up, and it looked like an atmospheric nuclear test. That's how bad Bainbury vented, unfortunately. Of course, we set up a containment panel. We had lots of stakeholders from different organizations that would review containment plans after that. And beyond Bainbury, of the nearly 400 tests that we did, only a tiny handful of them vented at all. And so we made significant progress there. Sorry I don't have time to talk about the Threshold Test Ban Treaty, because there is some great stuff there involving Charlton Heston. For those of you who remember Charlton Heston, you can ask me in chat if you want to stick around more about that. But anyway, Nevada, the test site, by the way, is a little bit larger than the state of Rhode Island. So it is a big place out there. I hope that all of you have been able to visit or will get to visit at some point during your career. We tested in other places as well. We did some tests in the South Atlantic. This was called Operation Argus. Livermore did 2 tests here in New Mexico. These were called Gnome and Gas Buggy. The Gnome cavity, when you set a bomb off underground, it creates a cavity. Usually that cavity collapses and it leaves a subsidence crater at the top of the surface. But anyway, this cavity was intact, and you can see the little guy in his red coveralls there. Inside of it, Livermore actually did a drill back that would accommodate a person. And I don't know if I would volunteer for that job either, but not too many people can say that they've done that. We also did tests in Mississippi. We did some in Alaska. We did a couple in Colorado. So we've kind of been all over the place, which surprises a lot of folks who are not familiar with the business. But anyway, the final full-scale test series is called Operation Julin, and the final test is called Divider. It was this one was a Los Alamos test that was conducted on September 23rd, 1992. We've not done another full-scale test since then. The next test would have been called Ice Cap, and you can see the Ice Cap rack tower up there on the top left, and it's still there. If you do go to Nevada, be sure and go to Ice Cap. The rack is still inside, and if you hear these terms like rack and rack tower, you have no idea what I'm talking about. That's my fault. I ran out of time and didn't really get to take you through that, and I do, again, apologize for that. Hopefully we can do another one of these talks one of these days. And so how do we test today? Well, we don't do full-scale tests, but we do lots and lots of testing at smaller scale here at Los Alamos, at Sandia. Livermore has the most powerful laser in the world, the National Ignition Facility. So we have all of these tools, some of the most powerful computers in the world. And, back in the day, if you wanted to find out if your design worked, you took it out to Nevada, and it either blew up or didn't, right? That's kind of a nice advantage. We can't do that anymore. So we really have to understand all of the physics of nuclear weapons design in a much more thorough way than they did back then. And you can see the quote from my buddy and fellow Texas Tech grad, Joe Martz, there at the bottom of the screen over on the right-hand side. It's a real challenge. We have huge challenges and exciting scientific challenges today. It's kind of another version of the Manhattan Project, although nobody really thinks about it that way. It really is tough science and rewarding, and of course, important is in the national interest as DOE and DOD continue this great partnership that we've had for many years now. And so anyway, I'm going to leave it on this slide as we conclude. I very much appreciate all the comments. I've seen all of these chats and comments pop up. I haven't got to read many of them, just the shorter ones as I try and talk at the same time. But sorry for going a couple minutes over. Really appreciate your time, the invitation, the technical support from the great folks at HDIAC. And again, hopefully we can do business again in the future. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Steve, who I think is going to moderate our discussion.
Yeah, Alan, thank you very much. We do try to stop these right on time. Partly it's because of how the podcast or the webinars are set up. Partly, we understand that people's time is precious. I think the one question I do want to ask you is that was asked by a lot of people, and obviously you have a lot to talk about. We did reference your article. If you had to recommend a couple things for somebody for a reading list or a video list, I think Richard Rhodes is probably one of the preeminent, his book, The Making of the Atomic Bomb, for example. What would you offer as an historian to our audience to get more information on this?
Okay, got it. So yeah, if we're talking about the Manhattan Project, I do think Rhodes's The Making of the Atomic Bomb is, Pulitzer Prize winning book. It is really the grand narrative, and I don't see anything surpassing that anytime soon. If you want a quicker read that's really good also, but flows a little bit faster, highly recommend James Konetka's The General and the Genius. It focuses on the partnership between Oppenheimer and Groves. And for sake of full disclosure, Jim Konetka is a good friend of mine. I think it's a great book, and I think that you'll enjoy it. You can also listen to it. That's also an audiobook version. I think there is a free audio version of Rhodes's The Making of the Atomic Bomb online as well. I think I can send the link for anybody who's interested in that. But again, for Manhattan Project, those are great books. And if you like something a little bit more technical in nature, highly recommend Critical Assembly, written by Lillian Hodison, and also my predecessor, Roger Mead, and several others as well. Critical assembly is an official technical history from Los Alamos. And the people who wrote it, they had access to all the classified records and the unclassified records. And we have a classified version here in our repository, which we might be able to transfer to you if you have the right credentials, of course. So that's good. That's great stuff for Manhattan Project. Currently, we are just starting to write a follow-on volume to Critical Assembly, which is going to be the history of the H-bomb. It will have a technical flavor, but we want to kind of mix in some of that Richard Rhodes, character development and alliteration and all that stuff too. So it should be a little bit more interesting to read than Critical Assembly. Critical Assembly is a great book, but again, it's not going to be an easy read compared to something like General and the Genius, which is just written so beautifully. So that's there. Other sources I would point you to are, go just browse around at YouTube. Go to Adam Central. That's Pete Coran's site where you can see lots of things blowing up. There are a lot of documentaries that are owned by Los Alamos, by HDIAC, that have been posted on YouTube now that you can see. And so go check out all those documentaries. A few of them are on my personal YouTube page. I can send a link again to anyone who's interested. I've got over 40 videos there. A lot of those videos, in fact, on my personal YouTube page are people coming back and talking about what it was like during World War II and the Cold War. And so you might find those interesting as well. Books for this period on nuclear weapons are, there's a good book. A lot of them are basically reference books. There is the history of DITRA, which is out there, which I think is very good. I think it's the Defense Nuclear Agency. It's the DNA history, which is very good. There are, of course, there are reports from DTEC, which is our sponsor today, which you can find online, which are outstanding. Here at Los Alamos, our repository is called the National Security Research Center. We are one of the largest libraries of any kind in the country. Now, I think that the New York Library has like over 50 million holdings. We have over 14 million objects in our collection, so it is very substantial. We can help you out with reports as well. Now, the problem is, one other thing I should mention also with testing, if you're interested in that, is John Hopkins and Barbara Germain Killian's testing in Nevada, 1950 to 1960, or something like that. That's not the exact title, but remember Barbara Germain Killian and John Hopkins. You can find that book on Amazon if you'd like to buy a copy. John is a former Los Alamos test director and field testing division leader. But what I wanted to do with my article is, what if somebody really wanted to have a good feel for the history of testing, but they wanted to have that feel within like an hour? Because you can't do that if you go out and look at all of these reports and everything else. And that's kind of the object of my article, is that you can go, you can read it, you can be done in an hour. It goes into more depth, talks about underground testing also as well. And it's heavily referenced. And so there's going to be lots of other references that you can go in there and explore. So anyway, as usual, a longer answer probably than anybody wanted to hear, but give those things a try. Let me know what you think, and if you need any other recommendations.
Well, thank you, Alan. And listen, everybody, the number of questions and on getting the products that Alan has mentioned throughout this brief was overwhelming. I'll reiterate, Alan's slides and the videos will be available on the HDIAC website, www.hdIAC.org. We do 2 of these a month, so there's lots of archive files out there, and Alan's will be stored there as well, and you can watch the whole thing at your leisure and watch the videos that he wasn't able to get to. Alan was kind enough to offer his personal email address, which is there as well. I would encourage you not to pummel him with requests for the slides. They are available to you. I'm sure that he'll be happy to engage in a discussion with you all. And as we all see, there's just a wealth of information on this topic. So I would like to thank you all for joining us today. And as we mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar, and I just said, the slides and the recording of the presentation will be made available for download at www.hdIAC.org. And then again, on the chat box on the left-hand side, we put Alan's email address there, only because you offered it, Alan. So
yes,
if you're interested in if you're interested in learning more about the IACs or in getting involved as a subject matter expert like Alan or a presenter, or just expanding your presence in our robust user community, you can reach out to us directly using the contact information you're going to see on the left-hand side of the screen. As I said, Alan's has already been posted there as well. In addition to monthly webinars, we do 2 of these a month. We also offer monthly podcasts. There's a lot of you had questions about nuclear treaties, the START treaty. Dirk Plant, the deputy at HDIAC, retired Army colonel, nuclear counterproliferation, countering weapons mass destruction officer, has a couple of podcasts and a journal out there about New START that might be interesting to you. Go ahead and check those out. You can also take advantage of our technical inquiry service where we offer up to 4 free hours of technical consulting. And then we also can perform customer-funded work in any of our technical focus areas via a pre-competed contract vehicle we have. So again, check out that contact information in the chat box. If you enjoy the products, also please like us, follow us on social media as well. And then be sure to join us for our next webinar, which will cover the First Responder Vaccine Initiative, and that's going to be given by Dr. Thomas Zink. We think that's going to go about the 24th of March or so. More info to follow on that. If you register on our website, you can sign up for notification of these webinars and podcasts. So, Alan, thank you very much. God, I love your passion on the topic. We're very grateful for your time, and best regards to everybody.
Yes, thank you, Steve and Dirk and John and Amber, everybody else there, and everybody who tuned in, and I look forward to next time. Everybody stay safe.